Sarah had always been the kind of person who believed in forever. From the moment she met Eric, she knew there was something special about him. They had met at a friend's barbecue, and from that moment, they were inseparable. He was charming, kind, and made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. They would spend hours talking about their dreams and what they wanted out of life. 3 years later, Eric proposed. It was a perfect evening, just the two of them under the stars. Sarah had never been more sure of anything. They got married a year later in a small, beautiful ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. Sarah felt like the luckiest woman alive. She had her dream man, and she thought their love would last forever. She pictured them growing old together, building a family and sharing everything life had to offer. In the early years of their marriage, everything was as Sarah had imagined. They traveled, laughed, and created memories. Friends would often comment on how perfect they seemed as a couple. "You two are the kind of couple everyone looks up to," they'd say. And Sarah would smile knowing she had found her soulmate. But over time, things began to change. Eric became distant. It wasn't a sudden change, but little by little, he was less present. Sarah noticed that he didn't talk to her the way he used to. He started coming home late from work, saying he had last-minute meetings or late dinners with clients. He was always on his phone, even during dinner. Sarah wanted to believe it was just work stress, something that would pass. She told herself that all marriages had ups and downs, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. One evening, Sarah decided to make Eric's favorite dinner. She wanted to spend a quiet night with him, just like they used to earlier. She lit some candles, set the table, and waited. Hours went by, but Eric didn't come home. The food sat cold on the table. Sarah checked the clock, and it was nearly 10 p.m. Eric hadn't texted or called her to say he'd be late. Just as she was about to call him, Eric walked in. He looked tired, his tie was loose, and his suit was wrinkled. "Why are you still up?" Eric asked, surprised to see her sitting at the dining table. "I made dinner for us," Sarah replied quietly. "You didn't text me. I didn't know where you were." Eric sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry, work was crazy. I had a meeting that went late." Sarah looked at him, searching his face for any sign of the man she once knew, but he seemed distant and distracted. She wanted to believe him, but something didn't feel right. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Eric forced a smile. "Yeah, just a lot going on at work. Nothing to worry about." Sarah nodded, but she wasn't convinced. The distance between them was growing, and she didn't know how to reach him anymore. She felt like she was losing him, and it scared her. A few weeks later, Sarah was cleaning up the kitchen when Eric's phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't unusual for him to get texts, but this time something felt different. The name on the screen was Maya. Sarah had never heard Eric mention anyone named Maya. Her heart pounded as she unlocked his phone. She had never gone through his messages before, but this time she couldn't stop herself. Her hands trembled as she opened the message thread. The texts weren't about work. They were personal, intimate, and flirtatious. They talked about meetings at a hotel, dinners, and late-night conversations. The messages went back half a year, each one confirming Sarah's worst fear. Sarah's hands shook as she read the messages. How could he do this to her? How could the man she trusted, the man she thought she knew, betray her like this? She sat down, staring at the phone, trying to process what she had just discovered. Eric came home an hour later. He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw Sarah sitting there, his phone in front of her. His face went pale. "Who is Maya?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Eric stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with guilt. He knew there was no point in denying it now. The truth was right there in front of Sarah. "Sarah, I can explain," Eric said, stepping toward her. "Who is she?" Sarah asked again, her voice sharper this time. Eric hesitated. "She's someone I work with." "And how long has this been going on?" Sarah demanded. Eric let out a shaky breath. 6 months. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath her. 6 months. 6 months of lies, of betrayal. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why, Eric? Why would you do this?" Sarah's voice broke as tears filled her eyes. Eric ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. It just happened. I never meant for it to go this far." Sarah stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. "You never meant for it to go this far? You've been seeing her for 6 months. How could you do this to me?" I'm sorry, Eric whispered, his eyes filled with regret. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. You've destroyed everything. She couldn't look at him anymore. The man she had loved and trusted had become a stranger. Without another word, Sarah grabbed her keys and walked out the door, leaving Eric standing alone in the kitchen. Sarah stayed with her sister Laura for the next few days. She couldn't bear to go back home, not after what had happened. Her world had fallen apart, and she didn't know how to put it back together. She spent hours crying, replaying every moment of her marriage in her head, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. Laura sat with her, offering comfort and support, but Sarah felt lost. How had she not seen the signs? How could she have been so blind to what was happening right in front of her? Friends called, offering words of encouragement, but nothing seemed to help. The pain was too deep. The man she had built her life with, the man she had loved with all her heart, had betrayed her in the worst way. Months passed, and slowly, Sarah began to heal. The pain of Eric's betrayal didn't disappear overnight, but it became more manageable with time. Each day, the sharp ache in her chest dulled just a little bit more. She realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. Rather, it was about learning to live with the scars. She started to rebuild her life, piece by piece, focusing on herself for the first time in a long while. She poured herself into her work, rediscovering her passion for graphic design. She threw herself into projects with renewed energy, finding comfort in the creative process. In the quiet moments at her desk, when her mind would wander back to the hurt Eric had caused, Sarah would force herself to refocus. She couldn't undo the past, but she knew she could shape her future. Sarah also reconnected with friends, the ones she had unintentionally drifted away from during her marriage. She had been so consumed by her life with Eric that she hadn't made much time for herself or for the people who had always been there for her. Now she spent her weekends catching up with them, going to brunches, taking day trips, and laughing in ways she hadn't in years. She was surrounded by love and support, and it felt like she was rediscovering who she was outside of her marriage. Every evening after work, Sarah would take long walks around the neighborhood. The fresh air and solitude helped her think and clear her mind. She started visiting the park near her house, where she'd sit by the pond, watching the ducks glide across the water. There was something calming about those quiet moments, something that reminded her that she didn't need to rush through the healing process and that it was okay to take her time. One day while strolling through the park, she passed by an art supply store. She hadn't picked up a paintbrush in years, but something inside her pulled her into the shop. She spent an hour browsing the shelves, feeling the textures of different canvases, running her fingers over the bristles of brushes. By the time she left, she was carrying a bag filled with paints, brushes, and a few blank canvases. Painting had always been her escape, and she hadn't realized how much she missed it until that moment. At home, she set up a small studio in her spare room. Slowly, Sarah began painting again. At first, it was just to pass the time, but soon she found herself getting lost in the colors and strokes. Each painting reflected a piece of her journey, her pain, her resilience, and her healing. It was as if each brushstroke helped her release a little more of the heartache that had weighed her down. As Sarah spent more time with her friends, one of them invited her to a small get-together one evening. It was casual, just a group of friends at a local cafe, laughing and sharing stories. Sarah almost didn't go, still not feeling entirely ready to be around new people. But something inside her said yes, and she decided to push herself out of her comfort zone. It was that evening when she met Lucas. Lucas wasn't flashy or trying to be the center of attention. He was soft-spoken and easy to talk to, with a calm energy that immediately put Sarah at ease. They ended up sitting next to each other during the evening, and their conversation flowed effortlessly. He asked her about her job, her hobbies, and the things she loved. It was simple, natural, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't feel like she had to guard her heart. As the evening ended and everyone said their goodbyes, Lucas gave her a warm smile and asked, "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, old fears tugging at her. But then she saw something in Lucas's eyes, the kindness, patience, and understanding. He wasn't pushing her for anything. He was simply asking. And so she smiled back and said, "I'd like that." In the months that followed, Sarah and Lucas began seeing each other more regularly. They started with casual coffee dates, just talking and getting to know one another. It wasn't rushed, and Lucas never pressured her for more than she was ready to give. He seemed to sense that Sarah needed time to heal fully, and he gave her the space she needed without pulling away. Lucas wasn't like Eric. He didn't try to impress her with grand gestures or romantic speeches. Instead, he showed his care in quieter ways. By remembering her favorite kind of tea, bringing her a small bouquet of flowers on random days, or simply asking how her day had been. It wasn't about proving something. It was about being there. On one of their walks through the park, Sarah opened up to Lucas about what she had been through. She told him about Eric, about the betrayal, and about how difficult it had been to trust again. Her voice shook as she shared the pain she had carried for so long, but Lucas just listened quietly, never interrupting. When she was finished, she expected him to offer advice or say something to make her feel better. But instead, he simply said, "I'm sorry you went through that, Sarah. You didn't deserve it, and I'm here for you, no matter what." His words brought tears to her eyes. For so long, Sarah had felt like she needed to be strong, to push the pain down and move on. But Lucas made her feel like it was okay to be vulnerable, to feel everything she had been trying to hide. As the months went by, Sarah realized that her feelings for Lucas were deepening. She found herself looking forward to their time together, and slowly, she began to open her heart again. It wasn't easy, but with Lucas it felt safe. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from a hill overlooking the park, Lucas turned to her. The golden light bathed the world around them in a warm glow, and for a moment, everything felt still. "I know you've been through a lot," Lucas began, his voice gentle, "and I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait for you as long as it takes." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had spent so long guarding her heart, building walls to protect herself from the kind of pain she had experienced with Eric. But with Lucas, it felt different. It felt real. There was no pressure, no expectation, just understanding and pure patience. Tears welled up in her eyes, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in so long, she felt at peace. The pain of Eric's betrayal would always be a part of her story, but it no longer controlled her. She had found a love that was true and pure, the kind of love that wasn't about fireworks or grand declarations. It was about quiet moments, shared smiles, and unwavering support. As she looked at Lucas, sitting beside her on that hill, she realized something. The love she had once dreamed of, the kind of fairy tale romance she thought she needed, wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was the love she had found now. A love built on trust, respect, and kindness. A love that was patient, steady, and real. As Sarah and Lucas's relationship continued to grow, they faced challenges together, but none of them shook the foundation they had built. They weren't perfect, and neither expected the other to be perfect. What made them work was the honesty and openness they shared. There were no secrets, no games, just two people who had found each other at the right time. Sarah often thought back to the woman she had been before. She had once believed that love had to be grand, filled with passion and drama. But now she understood that real love wasn't about sweeping gestures or constant excitement. It was about consistency. It was about being there for each other through the good days and the bad. With Lucas, Sarah felt truly seen. He didn't try to change her or mold her into someone else. He accepted her for who she was. And in return, Sarah found herself giving more of her heart to him, little by little, until she realized she was no longer afraid to love fully again. One afternoon, as they walked through the park hand in hand, Lucas stopped and turned to her. "I've been thinking," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "About what?" Sarah asked, curious. "About us. About the future." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't out of fear. For the first time, the idea of a future didn't scare her. She looked into Lucas's eyes and saw nothing but love and understanding. "I want to build a life with you," Lucas continued with his soft voice. "I don't know where it'll lead, but I know I want you by my side." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she squeezed his hand. She had spent so long afraid of what the future might hold, afraid that she would never trust again. But now, standing there with Lucas, she realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. "I want that too," she whispered, her heart full. In Lucas, she had found a partner, a friend, and a love that was real. And as they stood together, watching the world move around them, Sarah knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together.